the address of the emergency?
Hey, what's your address? Man, person just got shot, bro.
What street are you on?
On, damn, what's you call it? I'm on Virginia Street.
How old is the person that got shot?
Like 25.
Okay. Is it male or female?
Male.
Okay, is he awake?
No, he's dying. I need an ambulance here now. White boy, wait.
Okay, where's the person with the gun?
That way, girl.
Sir,
That way.
who is it that shot him? Hello?
No! Listen!
Sir? Hello?
I was dispatched to a report of a gunshot victim on West Virginia Street. So as I drove to the call, obviously your adrenaline is amped up some because we don't drive to a barking dog call with lights and sirens on. So we're driving there and you know it's a serious call.
All right. Where's the shooter at?
He ran. White male, black shirt, green bandana.
White male, green bandana.
Black shirt.
Got a black shirt. I send the medics in. Say, what happened, dude?
My brother just had pulled up and seen the shooter. The shooter.
What's his name? What's the shooter's name?
I don't know. I couldn't get a good visual of him.
Just keep pressure. Keep pressure where you're at, okay? Don't let up. What's your brother's name?
Jose Pena.
Jose Pena.
Yeah.
As soon as I opened the door, I realized how serious the situation was because there was blood all the way onto the passenger seat. I began to look for signs of life on him, and I wasn't seeing that, but we continued to hold pressure. The medics were then called up to come and deal with the subject and try to provide advanced life-saving measures that they have the skills and ability to.
Y'all stand back up. Come on, get off the car, get off the car, get up. There may be a, get off the car, come on. Over here.
Hey, give me a... Open that blanket right there. Oh, 4x4s. Wipe them off.
Told you to get it out.
Would there be anybody that you know of that could do that?
No, I don't know who the that was, and I don't know what the hell's going on.
How old do you look?
He was probably about 25 age.
Now, speaking with Jose's brother, he had told us that the suspect's description was that he was a white male, slim to medium build with shorter blonde hair.
Which way did he go?
My cousin said he ran that way.
Where's the cousin at?
My cousin's the one that probably flagged you guys down there.
What did he flag me down?
He's the one that was out here with him when that happened.
Jose's brother said that her cousin was standing right there, but he had already left the scene. And that kind of raised concerns on our end because we didn't know if he was a witness, a suspect, or if he had left to try to go chase after the suspect. We went from there to the hospital where we met with medical staff. That's when we were informed by the doctors that Jose Pena had succumbed to his injuries and we were no longer working an aggravated robbery. We were working a homicide.
My brother Jose was kind. He loved his family. He loved my kids. He loved me. He took care of all of us. So he was my younger brother, but he was my little big brother because he looked out for us. He was always there for me. He, more than anything, wanted to start a family. He wanted to be married. He wanted to have kids. It never happened. He never got the chance to, even. He would have been 24 in a week before it happened. When they let me know that my brother Jose had passed, how I felt wasn't even describable because I just felt my whole air leave me. I don't think I've ever cried in front of people like that.
Se preocupaba por mí. Cuando trabajaba, él me decía, cuando llegaba, mamá, necesitas dinero. Y él le decía, no, mijo, guarde su dinero. Mamá, ya comiste, mamá. Te traigo algo de comer. Y yo siempre le decía que no, pero como quiera él me traía. Porque él era como un ángel. Como un ángel para mí.
As we were investigating, we observed there was a tent in front of the car. We were looking for pieces of evidence. In the tent, we found a small amount of marijuana, but that wasn't really our concern at that point.
We were showcasing.
I agree. I'm thinking,
Right where
well,
you're standing.
nah, it's Sternum, he said there's a bullet hole in the window, so
This one?
yeah.
It's down there. So.
Because I asked him if he
Somewhere around here.
knocked it out or what.
We had understood that there had been one gunshot fired from witnesses on scene, and so we began looking for a shell casing in the area. I found the shell casing in the grass. It was a silver shell casing, and it was about 10 feet in front of the front end of the car. Now that we were establishing the crime scene and we had a shell casing, we then needed to figure out which direction the shooter had fled.
We looked around, tried to determine the most feasible route on foot to get out of there the fastest, because there were a bunch of different directions that he could have gone, but he would have obviously wanted to have picked the quickest route to get out of there on foot.
You'll see some foot skid marks. Those are not from any of us. So as soon as you come down to the left, that's where you'll actually see the skid marks.
Okay.
And that's as far as we walked up, down, right there and stopped there.
We did call a K9 unit patrol out there to assist us.
I think you're gonna go down here. This, I try to think, what would I do?
It's going back in the direction of Steve if you go back this way.
You're gonna hit this open area. Is there a trail? Yeah, there's a trail. To the right.
Over here.
When the suspect flees the scene, sometimes they'll drop items of evidence that they don't know they dropped or they're not aware of. In this instance, it was a flip-flop that was on the path that the suspect may have taken and that the K9 assisted us with finding. So we'll place the flip-flop in a brown paper bag and submit it for DNA testing to the state lab.
From the initial scene, we start to spread out, canvassing the area, knocking on doors, looking for surveillance cameras.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good.
Hey, I'm Detective Miller with Bryan Police. We're just trying to see if y'all saw anything on the street, like any suspicious people or vehicles.
Yeah, I'm gonna go get my mom to see if she saw something. Okay?
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you. Wait, she's actually in the backyard, so if you don't want to go.
Hey, can we just walk around and talk to her? Okay, thank you. Sorry to bother you. We're trying to see if anybody saw anything on the street, like people.
So after our canvass, we didn't find anything that was useful or helpful to our investigation at this point. We were basically coming up with a dead end.
Thank you.
On a murder investigation, we want to move fast.
I think this is the old camera that stopped working and somebody screwed up there.
There is a sense of urgency.
Got enough room probably for a human who's in a hurry.
The cousin is still out there. We obviously don't know what he's capable of. And at this point, the clock is ticking, and we've got to get moving. After speaking with the Pena family, they were able to give us contact information for the cousin that left the scene because we really wanted to talk to him. We reached out to him. He agreed to come to the police department, and he came up and gave a statement.
Okay, I appreciate you coming in. I'm Detective Davis. This is my partner, Detective Miller. Well, just start with me and tell us what happened, what was going on.
And I was talking to my cousin, like, where he was at, where he was shot at.
Okay.
And I seen a white boy with a white mask.
With a white mask?
Yeah, I mean, not white mask, blue mask.
Okay. Now, when this happened, and where did you go from there?
I called the 911, bring the ambulance.
Okay.
And then after that, I went to the end of Virginia Street and started walking down the lawn to go back all the way to the left.
Okay. Tell where the guy went when he left.
From behind the railroad track.
Okay.
Like they came from behind the wood, you know where the wooden fence is?
Yeah.
All right. You know how you come to the railroad track on this side? He came from that way.
One of the key pieces of information that the cousin was able to give us was the route that the suspect ran when he fled the scene. And the route that he told us was the exact same route that the canine had initially sniffed and found the trail going through some thick brush towards railroad tracks. When it came down to motive and asking the cousin what, the specific details of this crime, initially he was a bit apprehensive. And we believe it was because there was potential narcotic sales going on in that area. And after we assured him that this was not a narcotics investigation, we wanted to find the shooter, he opened up a little bit more and was able to give us some more useful information in our investigation.
Pushed me, that's when I said, okay. And that's when he pointed the gun at me, give me your wallet. Okay. And then I gave my wallet, I put my wallet in his face. Okay. And then that's when he see my cousin and got all the money in the car. Okay. And that way my cousin put the gun in my cousin, he's like, give me the money. And my cousin didn't want to give it up. So that's when he shot him.
Okay. Did he say anything else other than that? Is there even the farthest part of the back of your mind, does he resemble anybody that y'all might have known?
I haven't seen him, but my cousin, the way the facial expression my cousin gave him, like he knew him.
The information that the cousin had told us about this appearing to be a robbery gone wrong. One of the things that the cousin told us that was quite helpful was that as far as white boys go, they had one white, customer or client that they sold to. He was not sure of his first name or last name, but he said he would look into it and ask around town. Also check social media and try to figure out who may have been associated with his cousin. And when he got that information, he would contact us. So while the victim's cousin is busy trying to find the contact information or a name of this white boy that is one of their clients, we go to the Pena family and start talking with them to see if they had any information that would help us out. Jose's sister agreed to come up to the police department and speak with us about this incident.
Tell me what you got.
I've been kind of writing everything down.
Okay.
Every time I hear something, I write it down. When it's inconsistent, I write it down.
She does not live there at that location, but we learned she had taken lots of notes and trying to detail every little thing that she could think of about her brother's death and anybody that they associated with. Some of the information she got was from social media too. Now, when we get information that's based off of social media, we have to take it with a grain of salt. We don't know if it's credible or if it's a rumor, but we do have to follow up on.
No, that's I understand that. There's always going to be questions. You know, if you don't know, you weren't there, so you can't. People are telling you stuff, and some stories change a little bit from one person's view to another, and even people that were there, stories change. So I get that.
One of the names that she was able to give us was one of the white boys they had sold to. His name was Johnny, and she had got that name from floating around on social media.
Right now, we don't know who the shooter is at this second. The description that they're giving us is similar to him, to this Johnny guy. And he's kind of messy-headed, kind of a rough guy.
It was just girls my brother was talking to.
Okay, but they're sending this guy Facebook messages. Hey, you're a this and a that. You're gonna get.
Well,
caught.
my brother probably said, something to those girls, and those girls they have their mindset. I mean.
I know, but I mean, it's that kind of stuff that stirs people up, and then next thing you know, somebody's saying it, so it's true when it's not. And then you get the wrong knucklehead who's about half twisted, and he goes and sees him and shoots him. Something crazy like that. I'm just trying to make that go away.
Yeah. Okay.
After we got the name Johnny from the sister, we started cross-referencing that through our files and our computer systems, and we came up with a guy who fit the profile. We were able to get an address for Johnny, and turns out it was only about 3 miles away from the crime scene.
Hello? Jonathan.
He's in bed.
Is he? Y'all want to go?
His lights off.
Y'all want to go get him for me?
Yeah.
Hello. How you doing, sir? That's him there. Johnny. Can I talk to you for a second? I'm Detective Davis, Bryan Police. How you doing, man?
Good.
This is Detective Hines. He's my partner.
Yes, sir.
Hey, kids.
Can just talk to you over here. We're investigating. Did you hear anything about the craziness that happened over on West Virginia Street the other day?
No, sir.
Okay, there was a guy got shot.
I seen it on Facebook News.
Okay. And we're just in the beginning stages of talking to people.
Yes, sir.
Your name came up as maybe an associate, or have talked to knew one of these guys, or that kind of thing. You have.
I just know, I guess, the guy's best friend's mother.
Johnny came to the door and we did our due diligence speaking with him. He did fit somewhat of the description. He had blonde hair and he was white. It was short hair, but he was considerably larger than the suspect we were looking for. So unless he gained 75 pounds overnight, we knew at this point in time he was not our shooter.
And standing here looking at you, I don't think you're who we're looking for. Oh.
Whenever it was, I do have an alibi.
Okay, what?
I haven't left here.
Okay. Is this who's your alibi then?
My best friend, sister.
So after speaking with Johnny, it is discouraging because at this point in time we're dead ending everywhere that we go. We decided to talk to the victim's brother again and speak with him to see if there was any information that he could think of that he forgot to tell us initially, which is not uncommon in a murder investigation with the shock of everything.
Hello, anybody home? Yeah, so we just want to touch base with you again. Of course, we've been running around talking to everybody and anybody that'll listen to us. But yeah, we're still running down any white boys.
So yesterday when you let me go, right?
Uh huh.
I went to go see who I could talk to, maybe seen something.
Right.
They seen the white male that left here get into a small Geo Metro white car across the tracks.
Okay, that's big news.
Although it may not have seemed like a big development to the brother about it being a white car, it was certainly a big one for us. If we can find this white car, then we can find our shooter.
Keep us up to date, man.
So the next step in our investigation is try to get a hold of this guy that the brother had already talked to and see what else he can tell us about this car.
Hey, buddy. Do you live here? Can I speak to you? Can I talk to you real quick?
The gentleman wasn't that cooperative with us.
Like, I know how it works in the neighborhood, dude. So.
Yeah, ain't no work no way.
What's that?
It don't work no way. I don't know why you...
Just trying to get some information because we ain't got much.
They told you what, about my house?
Told you this. Somebody who lives in this greenhouse might have some information about what they saw.
Look, I'm being real with you, man. I'm not gonna beat around the bush. You know what I'm saying? I live upstairs.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Okay. I don't know the cat. You know what I'm saying?
You don't know the cat who?
Whoever that was.
Whoever that was.
You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
So, you know, I'm fresh out, bro. I did 5 years. I don't know these cats around here. You know what I'm saying?
I understand that. I'm not asking you who he was. I'm just asking you
That's
what you saw.
saying, but I seen that car right there, man. I didn't get no plates. I didn't get none of that.
We learned from speaking with him that he had recently been released from prison, and he did not really want to be speaking with us or be involved at all in a homicide investigation.
I'm you know, really, I'm gonna be real with you, man. You know, I'm gonna end up getting for this, man.
I don't think so.
Man,
I don't even know your name. All I know
the hood, man. You don't gotta know my name. The hood know my name.
This guy was able to corroborate what the brother had told us, so wasn't really the information that we were hoping for to be able to narrow down this white car or the suspect. But at least now we're armed with some information, and we know that we're looking for a white car, so there's a glimmer of hope there.
The day of my brother's funeral, we had it at the church that we would go to as kids, and the service was beautiful. Family, friends that we hadn't seen in a while, come together and be a shoulder to cry on. It was really pretty. It was sad, but it was a little bit more comforting to know that you had, the community come together and help us go through a hard time, and we don't have to go through it alone.
Cuando fue lo de la funeraria, muchos de sus amigos me ayudaron, y ya cuando pasó el funeral, en el funeral también hubo mucha gente. Cuando fuimos al entierro, también hubo mucha gente, bastantísima gente que había. Y no quiero recordar mucho de esos días porque es triste. Por toda la gente que me ayudó, por él pude enterrar. Porque yo ya no trabajaba y toda la gente me ayudó.
Not too long after we received a call at the station, someone had some information for us. Actually, it was a carpenter that lived in the area where this occurred, and we met up with him.
Hey, how you doing? Did you make a call to us?
Yeah, I called earlier.
Right.
I seen you walking down the neighborhood yesterday.
Okay, cool. Okay.
I saw a white car pull up. I didn't see it pull up, but the white car was right there next to that car.
Was it sitting there empty, or?
It was sitting there empty. I seen a car, paying attention to it, got caught watching the movie, heard a pop, heard one gunshot.
Then, okay.
We heard a shot, and we think nothing of it. This happened like 2:45ish.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a white round car, round-ish car.
Okay. Okay. How many doors?
4-door, white.
Okay.
I believe it's 4-door.
Okay.
Tinted windows. It looked kind of beat up.
Okay.
And I think it had something like some kind of sticker on the side of on the back of that window.
One of the more specific things that he said was it had a bad tint job on the back, that it was bubbled up tinting on the back windshield. We felt that this was enough information that we could put out a BOLO for all our neighboring counties and other departments and other jurisdictions to be on the lookout for this particular white car for us. So this was a huge development in this investigation.
Potential armed and dangerous involved in the
Yeah, could be a witness, could be a suspect.
Detain and hold at this point, or?
Yeah, notify us.
Notify.
CID.
Okay. Will you bellow it as an involved vehicle in this incident over here? Possibly armed and dangerous. Detain and notify CID.
Through the information that we got, details on the suspect vehicle and searching our database, we were able to narrow down a potential suspect vehicle that fit the description. That particular vehicle returned to a female that lived at an address off of Woodcrest Drive, which is about 6 miles away from the crime scene. Once we had the address on this particular house, we started doing drive-bys, hoping that we could catch a glimpse of the vehicle there. Ultimately, we set up undercover officers doing surveillance at that location. A short time later, the vehicle did show up. It did fit the description. The officers that were doing surveillance let us know that 2 white males got in the car and that it had gone mobile. One of our marked patrol units was able to catch up to the vehicle around Highway 6 and Rock Prairie Road, made a traffic stop on the vehicle.
Is that your son? That's my son.
Sir, can you step out and talk to me a second? We can explain stuff here in just a second.
I'm just avoiding all this because it's kind of freaking me out.
Okay, well don't be freaked out.
Well, I am because I don't understand what's going on.
Well, that's what I'm here for, sir. Come on up here.
We were able to recognize pretty quickly that the front passenger fit the description of the shooter. He was identified as 30-year-old Cameron Crumry.
It's regarding, you can step out.
And the driver of this vehicle was his father.
What's that? My wallet back in my pocket? Yeah. You carry any kind of... I have it right there. I appreciate it. You have any other... No.
Nope, nothing else.
Is there anything in the car, any kind of weapons, anything like that? Okay. Do you have an issue with going through the car to make sure there's no weapons, anything like that may lend to what we're looking into?
We're just going over to a paint job.
I know, but we're just asking for your permission to go through here before we go through there.
I don't really see a need.
Okay, well I've asked you first, but we are gonna go through it. Okay, just based on what we know about the car to make sure there's no weapons, no nothing, anything there. My rifle is in the back.
They did not want us to search it, but after consulting with our DA's office, we did ultimately search that car and we found a rifle in the trunk, and Crumry actually had a knife on him as well. One of the other things that we wanted to do was look at his arms. He was wearing a long sleeve shirt. We wanted to see if he had scratches on his arms from running through the brush that was at the scene, and he refused to show us his arms.
Can you give me some information on the history of this car? Whose car is this?
This is my son's fiance's car.
Whose son?
My son's fiance.
Okay.
Him and his fiance live in my house with my grandson.
Okay.
And that's her car. It's registered to her.
Okay.
The vehicle that Cameron and his father were in was towed to the Bryan Police Department's evidence bay, and that is so that we can process that vehicle at a later time in a controlled environment.
So you said this was girlfriend or like fiance?
The detectives at that point went and typed up a search warrant for the residence off of Woodcrest where Cameron, the father, and the fiance resided.
So after we had the suspect vehicle towed from the scene, we all went back to the address on Woodcrest, including Cameron and his father.
Hello?
Brian. Can I talk to you for just a moment?
I can't let you because this isn't right now.
We were able to contact the owner of the white car, the female, the fiance of Cameron, and she did not want us to come inside and search the house. So at that point in time, we were kind of in a holding pattern, and we waited there at the scene with her outside the house while we secured a search warrant. After a short wait, a judge signed the search warrant for the house, and we were able to go in and begin our investigation at this location. Some of the focus was in Cameron's room, obviously, and there were some interesting items that were discovered inside there. We learned pretty quickly that he appeared to be a prepper type. He had numerous, I guess, called go bags. Each bag had survival items in it, weapons, ammunition, food, bandages. There was some narcotics, some marijuana found in the house, as well as a large sum of cash. There was likely a narcotics transaction taking place, specifically involving marijuana at the time of the shooting, and we know that, that's largely a cash business, and so this was one of the major links from the house to the suspect location.
The evidence that was located in Cameron's room did not necessarily help our investigation, but it did help us understand the type of person that Cameron was. The evidence that hit the jackpot was later found in the shed.
There was one particular Rubbermaid tub that had a bunch of boxes stacked on top of it, and I was able to lift part of that lid up because it was on the bottom and it was a flimsy lid, and I was able to pull it up just enough that it snapped out of my hands, but it was long enough for me to see inside that Rubbermaid tub that there was a brand new trash bag in there that didn't have any dust on it. And everything else in that shed had dust on it except that. So I went back into that Rubbermaid container and pulled that plastic bag out, and that's when we discovered a firearm, a pistol that was consistent in the caliber that was used in Jose's murder, loaded with ammunition that was the same brand and same caliber as the shell casing recovered at the scene, along with some clothing items that fit the description, and ultimately a single flip-flop that was a match to the one that was found at the murder scene in the brush near the railroad tracks. So with all this evidence that directly linked Cameron to the murder scene, he was arrested at that time.
Go ahead and put your hands behind your back, Cameron.
Okay.
All right, they got a warrant for you, okay?
Why?
Well, why do they have a warrant for you?
Yes.
For aggravated robbery.
What?
Aggravated robbery.
Aggravated robbery?
Yes, sir.
I thought this was homicide.
Good. Yeah. Almost missed the seat. Almost.
Cameron was transported to the police department for questioning by our detectives.
Good. Good?
I keep trying to use my nose.
Oh, I got you. Just pull it, yes, that one's moving to work. Good. Bust a left. There we go. Go in here.
I gotta keep you cuffed, all right? Until the detectives tell me that I can take you out of them, then I'll take you out of them, but I'll cuff you up front. I'll just leave them up front, all right? Word for you. All right.
So anytime we're in an interview with a murder suspect, ultimately our golden standard is for a full confession, a truthful confession, and there's different ways to go about trying to get that. That's how we started with, to try to build up to the fact that we knew that he was not at his house at the time of the murder, or his fiance's car was not at the house either. That's where we went from there.
We're trying to figure out exactly what happened on this last Saturday, on the 30th. Okay, and we kind of discussed it a little bit on Senior Road over there in College Station. Remember our conversation?
Yeah, now I'm hearing it's aggravated assault or aggravated robbery or...
Right. It kind of plays into somebody losing their life. Let me ask you a question. How familiar are you with Brian?
Okay. I'm not familiar with Brian almost at all.
Okay. Well, all the little, micro bumps and bruises, the missing little vent thing in the front, your little, stickers you have in the back, the butterfly sticker and that little square thing.
At this point in time, we start pressing him a little harder, turning up the heat to try to get him to blunder or give us what we're looking for, that golden standard, that truthful confession to what we're looking for in this.
Yeah. With all its, characteristics, 0% chance that it's not the same car, was on the west side of Bryan on 30th, which was a Saturday, at approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or actually a little bit before that, okay, with a white male driving who looks a lot like you.
While we were pressing Cameron for his whereabouts at the time of the murder, he continuously told us that he was at home with his father and his fiance. What he didn't know was that we had already talked to the father and the fiance during interviews, and they couldn't definitively say that he was there at that particular time of the day.
I had 2 people that were there who saw me at my house. Like,
And we talked to your dad, talked to your wife, independent of you. Your dad says he was asleep. We went and talked to your wife. She says she was in the kids' room doing Easter arts and crafts for hours. Had no idea whether you were there or you weren't. So neither of them can acknowledge your alibi that you weren't there.
I'm certain to go back and talk to them. They'll say that I was there at round 2. I distinctly remember
Round 2 is plausible and possible. This happened a little bit later.
I don't know what to tell you. I was at my house at 2. I stayed there.
Okay.
Hung out for most of the day.
Okay.
That was it.
That's a provable lie.
No, actually it's not. It's provable truth. Well, we're gonna start talking about lies and all that kind of stuff. I do need an order.
Okay, that's fine. Okay.
I think at that point in time, he knew he had been backed into a corner, and ultimately he shut down, stopped answering questions, and requested his lawyer. We felt that we were so close, and the last thing we needed was a confession. It did feel like the rug was pulled out from under us as far as the interview went.
A search warrant was obtained for Cameron's DNA and photographs of his body.
We had Cameron remove his shirt so that we could check to see if we could see any scratches on his body. Both his arms and his legs and the top of his feet were completely covered in scratches and scrapes, which would be consistent with somebody fleeing through thick brush to get away from the crime scene.
That DNA is then sent off to the state lab, and it's compared to any evidence items that we want DNA tested. It's also going to be compared against the items of evidence that we submitted for DNA testing, such as the flip-flop on the trail. We can compare Cameron's DNA to that flip-flop, and it's going to tell us whether or not he was wearing that flip-flop at any point in time.
Ultimately, we felt like we had built a very strong case with the evidence that we'd collected. But then a huge development in this investigation occurred. We were able to obtain some video footage from surveillance from a neighbor in the area that had captured the scene that day at that time of the murder. Ultimately, we were able to see that Cameron went to this location to likely buy narcotics, saw the opportunity to potentially rob somebody, and pushing and pulling the gun on Jose's cousin, taking his wallet, trying to rob Jose, but ultimately shooting him. Then fleeing the scene through the brush, losing his flip-flop, getting his arms and legs scratched up by all the brush as he's going through the brush. Crossing the railroad tracks where he was seen by multiple witnesses, get into a white vehicle, and then trying to hide all the items used in the murder, including the weapon and the clothing worn, in the shed. We believe that Cameron thought he was clever enough to be able to hide his tracks and get away with this.
Due to the overwhelming amount of evidence that we had, the hard work of the detectives, crime scene investigators, and patrol officers, Cameron Crumry pled guilty to the murder of Jose Pena and was ultimately sentenced to 50 years in the Texas prison.
A case like this is very fulfilling to the investigators. Typically in any homicide investigation, there seems to be always that extra piece of evidence that you're looking for to help seal the deal. And whether it gets destroyed or whether we couldn't find it or what, there's just always that piece. And what's memorable about this particular investigation was it seemed like we found every single piece of evidence that we could have even hoped for to solve this crime. In law enforcement, we're here to protect the public, and when you can see all the efforts that the team has put forth in tracking people down in vehicles and individual pieces of evidence, all that put together to be able to lock away someone like Cameron and give the family some closure.
Yo no quería que ninguno de mis hijos se vaya primero. Siempre le he pedido a Dios que yo me muera primero. No me puede despedir de él. Pero pues yo lo siento como si está conmigo. Siempre miro sus fotos y siempre hablo con él.
If my brother was sitting across from me right now, I would tell him how proud I am of him. And I'm sorry that he was taken from us the way that he did. I would want to hold him so tight. Life is short. Life is unexpected. If you have anything to say, do say it. If you love somebody, you tell them you love them. Because you never know when they can get taken from you.
The phone rang at 12:17 a.m., a thin electronic sound slicing through a station that had learned to live with quiet, and the voice on the other end did not ask how the night was going, did not ask if the line was secure, did not even say a name. It only said a year and a place and a sentence that made the detective straighten in his chair, because some cases never really sleep, they just wait, and this one had been waiting since Florida, 2001. When the heat was thick enough to blur edges and a woman walked out of her job and never reached home. The caller spoke calmly, almost clinically, as if reading weather, and then went silent, leaving behind coordinates, a memory, and the faint implication that silence itself had finally grown too heavy to carry. In the summer of 2001, Florida felt invincible, all neon nights and sun-bleached afternoons, a state that moved fast and forgot faster, and the town sat low and wide between a highway and the water, its rhythm set by traffic lights, shift changes, and the tide. Everyone knew everyone well enough to wave but not well enough to pry, and that balance made people comfortable, careless even, because danger felt like something that happened somewhere else, on television, in bigger cities with harder names. She fit into that comfort perfectly, dependable, punctual, unremarkable in the way that makes someone feel safe, the kind of person whose disappearance didn't immediately read as a warning but as a mistake that would correct itself. She clocked out just after 6, joked about the heat, slung her bag over her shoulder, and stepped into a parking lot that had seen the same routine play out hundreds of times before. Fluorescent lights hummed. Engines turned over. Someone argued on a phone. Nothing about that moment looked like the start of a mystery, and that was the problem. No one remembers ordinary moments until they become the last ones. Her car sat where she had left it, doors unlocked, keys gone, seat pushed back just enough to suggest she had planned to return. There was no blood, no broken glass, no sign that anything had gone wrong, and that absence would become the loudest detail of all. By morning, concern crept in slowly, politely. She hadn't shown up for work. She hadn't called. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Friends drove past her place. Family told themselves she was busy, that something had come up, that Florida traffic was unpredictable. When police finally took the report, the tone was procedural, careful not to alarm, because adults go missing for reasons that aren't crimes all the time. The first headlines reflected that restraint. Missing woman reported. Police investigating. Community urged to stay calm. Calm is always the first casualty. Searches began where they always do, along roadsides and canals, through patches of scrub where the ground cut sharp and the air buzzed with insects that did not care about human fear. Volunteers formed lines. Dogs pulled at leashes and then stopped, confused, their certainty dissolving near the edge of asphalt. Helicopters circled, chopping the sky into pieces. Each hour that passed without a trace turned speculation into something darker. When a disappearance refuses to behave, people start inventing reasons for it. Witnesses came forward with fragments that didn't fit together. A truck idling too long. A woman who looked like her at a gas station miles away. Headlights seen near the parking lot after closing. Every detail was logged, mapped, cross-referenced, and then quietly set aside when it refused to lead anywhere solid. Detectives worked through the predictable list, asking the same questions in living rooms and break rooms, watching hands, listening for hesitation. Everyone had an alibi that held just long enough. Everyone insisted on cooperation. Everyone wanted to help, and none of it mattered. As days stretched into weeks, the language hardened. Mysterious disappearance. Foul play not ruled out. Family pleads for answers. The town absorbed the shock in stages, first curiosity, then fear, then a brittle kind of normalization where people checked locks more often but still went about their routines. Her face appeared on flyers taped to telephone poles, on the evening news, on the refrigerator doors of people who had never met her but felt compelled to look anyway. Each time someone glanced at that photo, they wondered what moment they were actually seeing, whether it was before something terrible or simply before nothing at all. The investigation stalled in a way that felt unnatural. There was no financial activity, no sudden phone calls, no online footprint to chase. It was as if she had stepped sideways out of her own life. Detectives hate clean disappearances because there is nothing to argue with, nothing to challenge, only a void that resists pressure. Evidence bags filled with items that answered no questions. The parking lot was photographed, measured, and released back to the public, scrubbed clean by rain and time until it looked like any other place where people came and went without consequence. Inside the community, the disappearance began to fracture into stories. Some said she had planned to leave, that she wanted something different. Others whispered about debts, about arguments no one could quite confirm. A few insisted it had been random, a crime of opportunity that left no signature because the person responsible had never intended to be caught. Each version said more about the speaker than the victim, and none of them brought her back. The family listened to all of it, learning the specific exhaustion that comes from hearing your loved one reduced to a rumor. Months passed, then years, and the case slid, officially, into the category no one wanted to name. Cold case. The words felt like an admission of defeat, a way of filing grief away neatly, but the truth was messier. Detectives rotated out. New investigators read old notes, circled the same names, asked the same questions, hoping that time had loosened something. Time rarely cooperates. It hardens stories. It teaches people how to lie better. Anniversaries became rituals of quiet pain. News stations ran brief segments, her photo aging while she did not. Tips came in sporadically, confident and wrong, each one reopening wounds before closing them again. A supposed sighting out of state. A jailhouse confession that collapsed under scrutiny. Each false alarm trained the community to brace itself against hope, because hope had started to feel irresponsible. The case lingered in the background of the town's identity, an unspoken cautionary tale that surfaced in conversations late at night, in bars and kitchens, prefaced by lowered voices and the phrase, "Do you remember?" Children who had been warned about strangers grew up and moved away. New families arrived, unaware that the streets they walked carried an unanswered question beneath the pavement. Florida moved on the way it always does, bright and relentless, but the absence stayed, woven into the heat. What no one could see was how close the truth had been, how it had lived alongside them, camouflaged by routine and familiarity. Someone had known. Someone had watched the coverage and felt their chest tighten each time her name was mentioned, each time the word, "cold case," crept closer to the headline. Silence can feel like safety when it's shared, but it corrodes from the inside. Years have a way of changing the equation, of making consequences feel less immediate and guilt feel heavier. When the anonymous tip finally came, it did not arrive with drama, no confession, no tears, just information delivered with the flat certainty of someone who had rehearsed the moment many times. A name that had never appeared in the file. A place that had been overlooked because it looked too ordinary. A reason for waiting that sounded less like strategy and more like fatigue. The detective listening understood immediately that this was different, not because it was detailed, but because it was restrained. People who lie often talk too much. This voice did not. Outside the station, the night pressed in, warm and damp, the same kind of night that had swallowed her all those years ago. The detective wrote everything down, careful not to contaminate the moment with expectation. He did not ask why now. He knew the answer would come later, if it came at all. Cases like this don't announce their endings. They shift, quietly, from impossible to dangerous. For the first time in decades, the file felt heavier in his hands, not with paper, but with possibility. Somewhere beneath the noise of traffic and the hum of streetlights, the silence that had protected the truth began to fracture, and when it did, it promised to take the town back to that parking lot, that summer, that ordinary moment that had never really ended. The coordinates scribbled onto the notepad did not look dramatic, no isolated swamp marked in red, no abandoned warehouse with a reputation, just a stretch of land that had existed quietly on the edge of attention for years, passed 1,000 times without consequence. The kind of place people forget because forgetting is easy when nothing seems wrong. The detective stared at it longer than necessary, tracing the lines with his finger, because cold cases rarely reopen with simplicity, and yet this felt almost insultingly plain, as if the truth had been hiding in daylight, confident that no one would bother to look twice. By morning, the unit was awake in a way it hadn't been for this file in years. Old binders came off shelves. Evidence logs were reopened. Names that had once been dismissed were read again, this time without the assumptions that had protected them before. The anonymous tip was treated carefully, not as a revelation, but as a door cracked just wide enough to see movement on the other side. Detectives had learned the hard way that excitement contaminates judgment, and judgment was all they had left. The location sat outside town limits, close enough to feel familiar, far enough to be overlooked, bordered by scrub and a narrow service road that hummed quietly with utility trucks during the day and nothing at all at night. In 2001, it had been even less remarkable, a forgotten pocket of Florida heat where mosquitoes ruled and human presence was optional. The tip suggested digging, suggested permanence, suggested that whatever had been placed there was never meant to move again. That implication hung heavy, because permanence is a decision, not an accident. Search warrants took time. Time stretched nerves thin. The family was notified in the careful language reserved for moments that could still go either way. They had learned to listen without reacting, to hear possibility without letting it bloom. The community, unaware, moved through another ordinary day, stepping over a truth that might have been buried beneath their routines for decades. When law enforcement finally arrived on site, the air felt different, as if the ground itself had been holding its breath. They started with ground-penetrating radar, the slow mechanical sweep cutting invisible lines across the earth, translating density into data. Each pass painted a picture beneath the surface, and within hours, anomalies appeared, shapes that did not belong, disruptions in soil that suggested interference, intention. No one spoke when the first flag went down. No one needed to. Flags multiplied, quiet and accusing, and with each one, the case shifted again, away from theory and towards something solid enough to hurt. Digging began carefully, methodically, because impatience destroys evidence and evidence was sacred here. Layers of dirt peeled back like pages that had been sealed too long, releasing the smell of damp earth and decay that did not belong to any one year. When bone finally surfaced, pale against the darker soil, time collapsed inward, 20 years folding into a single, suffocating moment. The detectives did not celebrate. They documented. They photographed. They slowed down even more. Closure, they knew, is never as clean as people imagine. The remains were incomplete but unmistakably human. Positioning suggested placement, not accident. The ground told a story of haste, not panic, of someone who knew how long they had and used it efficiently. Nearby, fragments of fabric surfaced, degraded but familiar, matching descriptions that had lived in reports for decades. The weight of it pressed into everyone present, because finding a body does not end a mystery, it sharpens it. It replaces questions of where with questions of who and why. Back at the lab, forensic analysis began its careful work, extracting information from what time had spared. Trauma markers emerged, subtle but decisive. This was not a disappearance. It was a homicide that had worn the mask of uncertainty for years. Cause of death narrowed. Time of death aligned with that summer night, anchoring speculation to reality. Each confirmation felt like a betrayal and a relief at the same time, because knowing is cruel, but not knowing is worse. As evidence solidified, attention returned to the name provided in the tip, a person who had lived comfortably on the edges of the investigation without ever falling into its center. In 2001, they had been interviewed briefly, cleared easily, their proximity explained away by coincidence and timing that appeared clean on paper. Paper, however, is only as honest as the questions asked, and 20 years ago, no one had asked the right ones. Now, with the weight of physical evidence behind them, detectives did not intend to repeat that mistake. They rebuilt timelines with ruthless precision, mapping movements minute by minute, comparing statements given then with realities uncovered now. Inconsistencies surfaced, small at first, the kind people dismiss when they want a story to end neatly. A receipt timestamp that didn't align. A claimed phone call unsupported by records. A memory that shifted depending on who was listening. None of it proved guilt on its own, but together it formed a pattern, and patterns are what investigators trust when instincts are no longer enough. When detectives knocked on the door again, decades later, the reaction was not what they expected. There was no shock, no confusion, only a flicker of recognition, as if this moment had been anticipated, rehearsed quietly in the mind of someone who had known all along that silence is never permanent. Questions were answered politely, carefully, with language that sounded practiced, but time had changed the stakes. DNA technology had evolved. Forensic databases had grown teeth. What once slipped through cracks now caught. A sample was taken. Consent given too quickly. The wait that followed was electric, stretched thin by years of expectation and dread. When results came back, they did not scream, they whispered, precise and undeniable. Genetic material recovered from the burial site matched the sample in ways that statistics could not explain away. Probability collapsed into certainty. The case that had lived as rumor and grief finally acquired a spine. Arrest procedures unfolded without spectacle. There were no crowds, no breaking news banners yet, just the quiet mechanics of accountability grinding into motion. In the interview room, the weight of decades pressed down hard. At first, denial came easily, reflexively, the muscle memory of someone who had avoided consequences for too long. But denial erodes quickly when faced with evidence that does not argue, does not threaten, only exists. What followed was not a dramatic confession, not the cinematic unraveling people imagine, but something smaller and more disturbing, a series of admissions delivered with exhaustion, fragments of truth slipping out between long silences. The night. The parking lot. A conversation that turned sharp. A decision made in seconds that echoed for decades. It was not monstrous in the way stories prefer, it was banal, fueled by impulse and the certainty that no one would ever know. As details emerged, the town began to feel the tremor beneath its feet. News broke cautiously at first, then all at once. Florida 2001 cold case solved. Anonymous tip leads to arrest. Community stunned. Headlines struggled to contain the magnitude of what had been hidden among them for so long. People replayed memories, re-examined encounters, wondered how close they had stood to a truth that had reshaped the family's entire existence. For the family, resolution arrived without relief. There was validation, yes, and the quiet confirmation that they had not imagined the wrongness of that night, but there was also grief reborn, sharper now that it had a shape. The idea of justice felt abstract, inadequate, unable to return what had been taken. Closure, they learned, is a word used by people who have not had to live with absence. As the legal process moved forward, the anonymous tip remained just that, anonymous, a final act of release by someone who chose the truth when silence became unbearable. Motives for the call were speculated on endlessly, but never confirmed. Guilt, fear, loyalty fractured by time. In the end, the reason mattered less than the result. A voice had broken decades of quiet, and the ground had answered. The town adjusted again, this time to knowledge instead of uncertainty. Streets looked the same. The heat still pressed down. But something fundamental had shifted. The story that had hovered unresolved for so long now had edges, names, consequences. And yet, even solved, the case refused to feel finished, because answers do not erase years, they simply illuminate them, revealing how long the darkness had really been there. Once the arrest was made, the town learned a new kind of quiet, not the silence of uncertainty that had stretched for decades, but a heavier, more deliberate stillness, the kind that settles after something finally breaks and everyone is left staring at the pieces, unsure where to stand. Patrol cars moved through familiar streets with an unfamiliar purpose. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, replaying casual conversations in their minds, wondering how many times they had crossed paths with a man now described in headlines with words like suspect and charged, words that reshaped memory without asking permission. Inside the investigation room, the case shed its last layer of abstraction. No longer a missing person file, no longer a cold case whispered about in hallways, it became a timeline with teeth, sharp and unforgiving. Detectives laid everything out again, but this time the pieces locked together with a finality that made denial impossible. The parking lot, the service road, the burial site, each location now connected by intent instead of coincidence. What had once felt like a mystery now felt like a failure of proximity, a truth that had been close enough to touch but distant enough to ignore. Interrogations resumed, not to extract new information, but to test what had already been said against what was now known. The suspect sat under fluorescent lights that hummed softly, answering questions with a composure that had been practiced over years of private rehearsal. He spoke in measured tones, correcting dates, minimizing moments, framing events as misunderstandings that had spiraled beyond control. There was no rage in his voice, no visible triumph, only a steady attempt to keep the story smaller than the evidence surrounding it. Detectives listened without interruption, letting silence do its work. Silence has a way of forcing people to fill it, and eventually, cracks appeared. He described the night again, this time with more detail than before, details that slipped past his own defenses because they felt ordinary to him. The heat. The smell of asphalt. The irritation that had flared unexpectedly. Each detail anchored the story deeper into reality, making it harder to retreat back into vagueness. This was not a stranger's crime. It was personal, impulsive, rooted in familiarity. Forensic specialists continued their work in parallel, building a scientific narrative to stand beside the human one. Soil samples confirmed transport. Fibers linked fabric to vehicle upholstery. Trace evidence that would have meant nothing in 2001 now spoke clearly, translated by advancements that had quietly matured while the case sat dormant. Technology did not solve the crime on its own, but it removed the space where doubt liked to hide. The past, it turned out, had been waiting for the future to catch up. As the case file thickened again, this time with answers instead of speculation, attention turned outward, toward the community that had lived alongside this secret for so long. Reporters arrived, drawn by the rare gravity of a decades-old mystery finally cracking. Cameras pointed at familiar landmarks, now framed as scenes instead of scenery. Residents struggled to articulate what it felt like to realize that safety had been an assumption, not a fact. The town had not been blind. It had been trusting. The narrative shifted in public consciousness, away from the victim's disappearance and toward the mechanics of concealment. How had this gone unnoticed? How had someone carried this knowledge for so long? The anonymous tip became a focal point of fascination, a ghost contributor to justice. Speculation swirled, but law enforcement remained tight-lipped, protecting the fragile integrity of a truth that had already waited long enough. Whoever had called had done so knowing the weight of what would follow. For the family, the days blurred into a sequence of briefings, paperwork, and moments of unbearable clarity. They learned details they had never wanted to imagine, details that replayed the night in their minds with a precision that felt cruel. Yet alongside the pain came a strange steadiness, a sense that the story had finally stopped moving, that it could no longer surprise them. The unknown had been a constant threat. Now, there was only grief, familiar and devastating, but no longer untethered. Court proceedings loomed, casting a long shadow over the months ahead. Legal language began to replace investigative shorthand. Charges were formalized. Timelines were locked. The suspect's past was examined with new eyes, past interactions reevaluated for warning signs that had once blended seamlessly into normalcy. Friends distanced themselves. Old acquaintances declined interviews. The ripple effect spread quietly, altering relationships that had never imagined being tested by a crime this old. The suspect's demeanor changed subtly as the reality of consequences set in. In private moments, the exhaustion hinted at during the anonymous tip seemed to mirror itself here, a fatigue born not of remorse but of inevitability. Years of silence had demanded constant vigilance, constant editing of memory. Now, that vigilance was no longer necessary. The truth was no longer his to manage. That release, paradoxically, made the admissions more candid, if not more compassionate. Investigators reconstructed the final hours with a clarity that felt almost intrusive. Phone records aligned. Traffic patterns made sense. Witness accounts that had once contradicted each other now fit when viewed through the lens of guilt instead of chance. The parking lot, once sterile and unremarkable, emerged as a space charged with consequence, every light fixture and exit route suddenly relevant. It had not been chaos. It had been controlled, brief, and devastatingly final. As details surfaced, the town confronted an uncomfortable reality. The crime had not required extraordinary circumstances, only opportunity and a belief that consequences could be avoided. That realization unsettled people more than the mystery ever had. It suggested that danger did not arrive with warning signs or dramatic flair, but quietly, embedded in everyday interactions. The solved case did not restore innocence, it dismantled it. Public statements were issued, careful and restrained. Law enforcement emphasized patience, respect for the legal process, and the importance of the tip that had broken the case open. The phrase, "cold case solved," dominated headlines, but beneath it lay a more complicated truth. Solving a case does not rewind time. It does not undo decades of waiting or restore the version of life that existed before a woman walked into a parking lot and disappeared. It simply names what happened and who is responsible. The anonymous caller remained silent, their role complete. Whether driven by guilt, fear, or a fractured loyalty that finally gave way, they had altered the course of the story with a single act. That knowledge lingered, a reminder that truth does not always surface through grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives through exhaustion, through the quiet decision that carrying a secret is heavier than releasing it. As the investigation phase drew to a close, detectives felt an unfamiliar mix of satisfaction and unease. They had done what they were meant to do, but the victory felt muted, tempered by the understanding of how long it had taken and how easily it could have remained buried. Files were updated. Evidence was secured. The case was no longer unsolved, but its legacy was far from finished. The town returned to its routine slowly, cautiously, aware now of the story beneath the pavement. The heat still pressed down. Traffic still flowed. But conversations changed, tinged with an awareness that silence can be both a shield and a weapon. And somewhere between the relief of answers and the permanence of loss, the case settled into its final form, no longer a question mark, but a lesson written in years, patience, and the cost of waiting too long to speak. The first court date did not feel like a beginning, it felt like a reckoning delayed too long, a room finally forced to hold everything that had been kept outside for decades, and when the doors closed behind the accused, the air tightened in a way no air conditioning could fix. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of bodies that had come not for spectacle but for confirmation, to see with their own eyes that the story they had carried in fragments now had a face seated at a table, flanked by counsel, reduced from rumor to defendant. Prosecutors spoke carefully, knowing that every word would echo beyond the room, not just in headlines but in the private spaces where people would replay it later, searching for meaning. They did not dramatize. They did not need to. Facts landed with their own force when arranged in order, a timeline sharpened by forensic certainty and witness corroboration. Summer 2001. End of shift. Parking lot. A confrontation brief enough to be missed, decisive enough to end a life. The courtroom listened, silent, absorbing the transformation of a long-held mystery into a sequence of actions that could be named. Defense arguments followed, predictable and strained, leaning on the distance of time, on degraded evidence, on the human tendency to remember selectively. They spoke of reasonable doubt as if doubt had not been the only companion this case had known for years. They suggested contamination, coincidence, misinterpretation, each theory crafted to widen cracks that no longer existed. The jury watched, attentive, already aware that the past may blur details, but it rarely invents bones where there were none. When forensic experts took the stand, the language shifted from narrative to precision. Measurements. Probabilities. Microscopic consistencies that ignored emotion entirely. Charts displayed soil strata. Fibers aligned in patterns that did not care about excuses. DNA statistics were recited slowly, deliberately, numbers too vast to dismiss as chance. Science did not accuse. It simply confirmed. With each explanation, the distance between 2001 and the present collapsed further, time stripped of its protective haze. The family sat through it all with a stillness that read as strength only because no other option remained. They did not look at the accused. They focused on the floor, on their hands, on the voice describing what had been done to someone they loved, now rendered into evidence markers and exhibits. Every detail extracted a toll. Closure, if it existed at all, did not announce itself here. What existed was endurance. Outside the courtroom, the town recalibrated. Conversations took on a different edge. People who had avoided the subject now spoke openly, dissecting the details with a mix of shock and grim validation. Others rejected discussion entirely, retreating into routines as a defense against the realization that familiarity had not protected them. The solved case did not unify the community, it divided it along lines of comfort and discomfort, belief and betrayal. As testimony continued, the anonymous tip receded into the background, its importance acknowledged but its source guarded fiercely. Law enforcement refused to speculate publicly, understanding that speculation would only distract from the evidence now carrying the case. Privately, detectives revisited the call, replaying its phrasing, its restraint, the way it offered just enough to force action. Whoever had spoken had known the cost of silence intimately. That knowledge lingered like a second presence in the room. The accused listened to the proceedings with an expression that shifted subtly as details emerged that could no longer be controlled. There were moments when the past seemed to break through the practiced calm, a tightening of the jaw, a flicker of recognition when a location was described too accurately to deny. Years of avoidance had built a narrative that kept the truth manageable. Now, that narrative was being dismantled piece by people who had no reason to protect it. Witnesses from the original investigation appeared, older now, their voices steadier or more fragile depending on how time had treated them. They described interviews conducted long ago, memories of answers that had felt sufficient then and glaringly incomplete now. None of them spoke defensively. Regret hung quietly over their testimony, an unspoken acknowledgement that cases like this rarely fail because no one cared, but because the truth hid just well enough to survive. The prosecution returned again and again to motive, not to sensationalize but to contextualize. Control. Fear. The belief that the absence of witnesses equaled the absence of consequences. It was not a story of elaborate planning, but of a moment seized and then buried, literally and figuratively, under the assumption that time would erase what had been done. Time, it turned out, had only preserved it. As days passed, the courtroom routine hardened into something ritualistic. Enter. Stand. Speak. Sit. Each motion carried weight because each one pushed the case closer to an outcome that could no longer be postponed. Jurors took notes, their expressions revealing little, absorbing the gravity of deciding not just guilt, but the shape of justice for a crime that had aged alongside them. Outside, reporters condensed hours of testimony into minutes, translating complexity into digestible segments. Headlines emphasized resolution, arrest, conviction looming. What they could not convey was the emotional lag, the way understanding trails behind information. The town received the facts quickly. Processing them would take much longer. When closing arguments approached, the tone shifted again, away from detail and toward responsibility. Prosecutors spoke of accountability delayed but not denied, of a system imperfect but persistent, of a voice that finally broke the silence and allowed the truth to surface. The defense appealed to uncertainty, to the erosion of memory, to the possibility that doubt still lived somewhere unseen. The jury listened, aware that doubt had been the dominant feature of this case for decades, and that certainty, once earned, should not be surrendered lightly. Deliberations were quiet, sealed away from cameras and commentary, leaving the town suspended in a familiar state of waiting. This waiting, however, felt different. It was not the open-ended limbo of the past, but a narrow corridor with an end clearly visible. People checked phones. Families gathered. Conversations slowed. The story that had refused to conclude for so long hovered on the edge of its final chapter. When the verdict came, it did not arrive with celebration. It arrived with gravity. Guilty. The word landed softly and heavily at the same time, carrying decades of absence, years of speculation, nights spent wondering what had happened in the dark. The courtroom absorbed it in silence. The family closed their eyes. The accused stared forward, finally confronted with an outcome that could not be deferred. Sentencing would come later. Appeals would follow. Legal processes would continue their measured march. But in that moment, the case shifted again, from solved to decided, from mystery to record. The town exhaled unevenly, unsure whether relief was appropriate, unsure what relief would even feel like after so much time. As people filed out, the parking lot outside the courthouse filled, mirroring the place where everything had begun. Cars idled. Doors closed. Conversations started and stopped. The heat pressed down, unchanged. Florida had not altered its rhythm for this verdict. Only the people had. And as night fell, the silence that settled was no longer empty. It was full of facts, of names, of consequences finally spoken aloud. The decades-long quiet that had protected a secret was gone, replaced by a heavier truth that would not fade, no matter how much time passed, because some stories, once finally told, refused to be forgotten. Sentencing did not arrive as a climax, it arrived as an inevitability, the final procedural step in a story that had already burned itself into the collective memory, and when the date was announced, the town responded with a muted attention that felt more like endurance than anticipation. People understood now that justice, when delayed, loses its theatrical shape and becomes something heavier, something carried rather than celebrated. The courtroom filled again, not with curiosity, but with a need to witness the last formal acknowledgement of what had been done. The judge spoke slowly, carefully, aware that every syllable would be replayed in living rooms and late-night conversations for years to come. The sentence reflected the gravity of the crime and the passage of time, a punishment that could not restore what had been taken but could at least draw a firm line between consequence and escape. When the words were finished, there was no outcry, no visible relief, only a long stillness that settled over the room like dust after collapse. For the family, the sentence did not feel like an ending. It felt like a boundary, a place beyond which the story could no longer hurt them in new ways. They listened, hands folded, expressions restrained, having learned long ago that visible emotion invited public interpretation. Their grief had been private for decades, shaped by absence and unanswered questions. Now it was defined by knowledge, by certainty that did not soothe but stabilized, anchoring memories that had drifted without explanation for too long. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited, but statements were brief, careful, stripped of excess. Law enforcement thanked the anonymous tipster without naming them, emphasizing again the power of information, the way a single decision to speak can disrupt decades of silence. Reporters asked about closure. The answers avoided the word. Closure suggests completion. What existed here was continuation, a life moving forward with a clearer understanding of what lay behind. As the legal chapter closed, another quietly opened, one that turned attention back toward the years between 2001 and the arrest, toward the unanswered question that lingered beneath everything else. How this had been possible. Internal reviews began, methodical and uncomfortable, examining early investigative decisions without assigning blame, but also without absolution. Files were reread. Timelines scrutinized. Missed connections acknowledged. The goal was not punishment, but learning, an attempt to ensure that silence would not find such fertile ground again. Detectives who had worked the case in its earliest days spoke candidly in closed sessions, describing constraints that felt immovable at the time and obvious in hindsight. Limited technology. Fragmented communication. A culture that treated the absence of evidence as evidence of absence. None of it excused the outcome, but it contextualized it, painting a picture of how a crime could slip through cracks widened by assumption and routine. The anonymous tip continued to cast a long shadow. Without a face or motive attached, it became a symbol onto which people projected meaning. Some believed it was guilt that finally overcame fear. Others suspected loyalty that fractured over time. A few imagined an accidental revelation, a secret spoken too freely and then hastily corrected by a call to authorities. The truth remained locked with the caller, protected by design, and in that protection lay a quiet lesson: justice does not always require confession, only interruption. In the weeks that followed, the town began to renegotiate its relationship with the story. Memorials appeared briefly and then faded, flowers wilting under the same sun that had shone on the parking lot all those years ago. Community meetings addressed safety, trust, vigilance, words spoken earnestly but without illusion. Everyone understood now that awareness does not guarantee protection. It only reduces the margin where danger can hide. The victim's name returned to headlines, this time without qualifiers like missing or mysterious. Obituaries were written long after they should have been, capturing a life interrupted rather than concluded. Friends shared memories that had been kept private, moments that felt too fragile to release before. Laughter surfaced alongside tears, a reminder that the person at the center of the case had existed fully beyond the circumstances of her death. That reclamation mattered more than any verdict. As months passed, the intensity softened, replaced by a quieter, more persistent presence. The case became a reference point, cited in discussions about cold cases, anonymous tips, and the long reach of forensic science. Training seminars mentioned it. Detectives used it as an example of patience rewarded and complacency punished. It joined a lineage of stories that warn and instruct without ever quite letting go. For the accused, now convicted, time took on a different shape, measured not in years evaded but in years imposed. Appeals were filed as expected, procedural assertions that time and doubt might still carve away at certainty. Courts responded methodically. Evidence held. The narrative remained intact. The past, once so malleable, proved stubborn when finally anchored to fact. The parking lot where everything had begun returned to anonymity, repainted, restriped, occupied by new vehicles belonging to people who did not know its history. And yet, for those who did, it remained charged, a reminder that violence does not require dramatic settings. It can occur under fluorescent lights, between routine gestures, unnoticed until its absence becomes unbearable. Late at night, in homes across the town, people still replayed the story, not out of fascination but out of an instinctive need to understand. They asked themselves where they had been in 2001, what they had assumed, what they had dismissed. The case had taught them that silence is rarely empty. It is often full of things waiting to surface. Years from now, the headlines will fade, replaced by new tragedies, new mysteries. But this one will linger in footnotes and recollections, cited whenever someone questions whether speaking up matters, whether information delayed is information denied. The answer, written quietly across decades, is yes. Silence protects only the moment. Truth, once released, reshapes time itself. And so the story settles, not into comfort, but into record. A Florida summer that never really ended. A disappearance that refused to remain unresolved. A single call that shattered decades of quiet and forced a town, a system, and a family to confront what had been buried too well. The case is solved, the verdict delivered, the sentence imposed, but the echo remains, a reminder that the past does not vanish when ignored. It waits, patient and heavy, for someone to finally speak. After the sentence was handed down and the cameras drifted away, the case entered a phase that never makes headlines, the long aftermath where truth settles into daily life and consequences unfold quietly, away from microphones and verdict boards. This was the part no one prepared the town for, the slow realization that solving a case does not restore normalcy, it redefines it. The mystery had once been a shared absence, a question mark everyone carried lightly because it had no shape. Now it had form, weight, and permanence. Detectives returned to their desks with an unfamiliar sense of finality. The file was closed, stamped, archived, but not forgotten. Closed cases live differently inside the people who work them. They stop demanding attention, but they never stop speaking. For years, this one had whispered through unanswered calls and half-read reports. Now it spoke clearly, reminding them how close certainty can hide beneath routine. Some detectives felt relief. Others felt a quieter discomfort, the awareness that the outcome depended less on brilliance than on endurance and time. Internal reviews continued, not as punishment but as reckoning. Supervisors dissected early decisions, asking not who failed, but how systems allowed critical moments to pass unchallenged. They traced assumptions back to their origins, the belief that a lack of visible violence meant a lack of violence altogether, the comfort taken in ordinary settings, the way familiarity dulls suspicion. Training materials were updated. Protocols adjusted. Lessons written into manuals in the hope that the next disappearance would not be given the same head start. The anonymous tip, still faceless, became a case study of its own. Law enforcement spoke about it carefully, emphasizing timing over identity. The caller had not provided a confession, only direction, and that distinction mattered. It reinforced a truth investigators knew but rarely stated so plainly: justice often begins not with answers, but with permission to look again. The call had granted that permission, nothing more, and nothing less. For the family, life after the verdict felt strangely exposed. For decades, their grief had been largely invisible, confined to private spaces and anniversaries. Now it had been illuminated, discussed, analyzed. Strangers approached them with sympathy and curiosity intertwined, asking questions that blurred the line between concern and consumption. They learned to navigate this new attention with restraint, protecting what little remained theirs alone. Healing, they discovered, is not accelerated by understanding, it is simply redirected. They visited the burial site once it had been cleared, the ground restored to neutrality. There was no ceremony, no crowd, only a quiet acknowledgement that this place had held answers for too long. Standing there did not bring peace, but it brought clarity, a tangible endpoint to a search that had never known one. The earth no longer felt accusatory. It felt resolved. The town, meanwhile, struggled with its own recalibration. Businesses continued. Schools reopened. Life insisted on forward motion. Yet beneath that momentum ran a persistent undercurrent of reflection. People spoke more openly about what they had once dismissed. Neighbors checked in on each other differently. Not with fear, but with an awareness sharpened by loss. The solved case did not make them safer. It made them more honest. In quiet moments, residents revisited memories from 2001, testing them against what was now known. A man seen often but never questioned. A comment that had seemed inconsequential. A pattern that only made sense in retrospect. These mental revisions did not change the outcome, but they changed perception, highlighting how easily normalcy absorbs warning signs when there is no framework to interpret them. For law enforcement beyond the town, the case rippled outward, cited in conferences and briefings as an example of delayed accountability achieved through persistence and chance. Analysts debated its implications. Was it a triumph of modern forensics or a cautionary tale about early complacency? The answer, uncomfortably, was both. Progress had solved what patience alone could not, but patience had been forced by missed opportunities. The convicted individual receded from public consciousness, reduced to a name in legal databases and occasional appellate filings. In prison, time reclaimed its slow authority, measured now by routines stripped of choice. The weight of years avoided gave way to the weight of years imposed. There were no public statements of remorse, no attempts to reshape the narrative. Silence, once a shield, now functioned as habit. Appeals progressed methodically, arguments replaying familiar themes of time, memory, and doubt. Courts responded with restraint, reaffirming the strength of evidence and the integrity of the process. Each denial reinforced a reality that had become increasingly unavoidable. The past could not be re-edited once it had been exposed to light. The story had settled into its final configuration. As seasons passed, memorialization took quieter forms. Scholarships established. Donations made in the victim's name without fanfare. Acts of remembrance integrated into everyday life rather than staged as events. These gestures did not seek closure. They sought continuity, a way to carry forward what had been interrupted without reducing it to tragedy alone. The parking lot remained unchanged, functional, and indifferent. People parked, locked their cars, walked away without thinking. For most, it was nothing more than asphalt and paint. For a few, it was a reminder etched permanently into muscle memory. They did not avoid it. They simply noticed it, the way one notices a scar long after it has healed. Late-night radio programs occasionally revisited the case, framing it as proof that cold cases are never truly cold. Listeners called in, sharing opinions about the anonymous tip, about justice delayed, about whether knowing was better than wondering. The discussions rarely reached conclusions. They didn't need to. The case itself had already answered the most important question: silence can be broken, even after decades. In private, some wondered what might have happened if the call had never been made. The thought lingered uncomfortably, a reminder of how contingent justice can be. The truth had existed all along, but existence alone had not been enough. It required a decision, a moment where fear loosened its grip just enough to let information escape. That fragility haunted those who thought too long about it. As years moved forward, the case slipped gradually from the present into history, its details preserved in archives and memories rather than headlines. New detectives read it during training, absorbing its lessons without having lived its uncertainty. For them, it was a solved case. For those who had lived through the waiting, it would always be something more complex, a timeline that spanned innocence and knowledge, ignorance and consequence. The Florida heat continued its relentless cycle, summers stacking atop one another, each indistinguishable from the last. But beneath that sameness lay a shift that could not be undone. A town that had once believed danger arrived loudly now understood how quietly it could move. A system that had once accepted absence as ambiguity now treated it with sharper suspicion. And a family that had lived with questions now lived with answers, heavy but finally immovable. The case did not end with relief. It ended with recognition, a collective acknowledgement that time does not erase truth, it only delays its arrival. When it does arrive, it does so without mercy, demanding to be faced in full. And long after the last document was filed and the last appeal denied, that recognition remained, steady and unresolved, a reminder that some stories do not conclude neatly. They simply stop waiting. Years after the verdict, the case stopped feeling like news and started feeling like infrastructure, something built quietly into the way the town understood itself, unseen but load-bearing, shaping movement and memory without asking permission. New residents arrived unaware, walking streets that carried a history they did not recognize, while those who had stayed learned to live with the strange duality of knowing exactly what had happened and still feeling the echo of not knowing for so long. Solved did not mean settled. It meant integrated. Law enforcement felt that integration first. Training sessions referenced the case not as a triumph, but as a reminder, a warning embedded in policy language and procedural checklists. Detectives were encouraged to question early assumptions, to treat ordinary settings as potential crime scenes, to resist the comfort of narratives that explained absence too easily. The Florida 2001 file was no longer active, but it was alive in margins and footnotes, its lessons threaded through discussions about vigilance and restraint. Cold case units across the state revisited their own archives with renewed urgency. Boxes were reopened. Notes reread. Names reconsidered. The anonymous tip had proven that time does not necessarily bury truth, it only disguises it, and that realization rippled outward, altering priorities and reigniting investigations that had been allowed to sleep. Not all of them would find answers, but the act of looking again became its own quiet form of accountability. The family, now navigating a life defined by both loss and resolution, experienced a shift less visible but more profound. Without the constant hum of uncertainty, grief reorganized itself. It no longer asked questions. It simply existed. They learned that answers do not close wounds, they change their shape, transforming sharp edges into something duller but deeper. Memory became safer territory, no longer interrupted by speculation or false hope. They spoke less publicly as time went on, choosing privacy over advocacy, understanding that their story had already served its purpose. When asked about the anonymous caller, they offered no theories, no judgments. Whoever that person was had altered the course of their lives irrevocably. Gratitude and resentment existed side by side, unresolved, because delay has consequences even when it ends in truth. In the town, the case settled into conversation the way weather does, referenced casually, almost reflexively, whenever someone mentioned safety, trust, or the passage of time. It became shorthand for the idea that things can look fine on the surface while hiding something unfinished beneath. That awareness did not make people fearful. It made them attentive, more willing to pause, to notice, to question the edges of routine. Local journalists revisited the story on anniversaries, but their tone had changed. Gone was the urgency, replaced by reflection. They wrote about systems, about patience, about the long arc between disappearance and accountability. The headlines no longer shocked. They instructed. Florida 2001 became a case study, a reference point used to explain why some stories refused to stay buried. The convicted individual faded further into obscurity, known now only through paperwork and precedent. Appeals exhausted themselves against evidence that remained unmoved. Legal language did what it always does, reducing complexity into standardized phrases that allowed the system to move forward. There were no revelations waiting in the wings, no hidden chapters threatening to reopen wounds. The truth, once exposed, held firm. Yet the anonymous tip continued to haunt the margins. Investigators occasionally revisited the recording, the notes, the cadence of the call, not to identify the caller, but to understand the moment that produced it. What pressure finally outweighed fear? What calculation made silence untenable? These questions had no answers, only implications. They suggested that truth is not always released by courage alone, but by fatigue, by the slow erosion of justifications that once felt sufficient. Community forums addressed these ideas openly, discussing the responsibility of knowledge and the cost of withholding it. People spoke about moments in their own lives when they had chosen quiet over disruption, understanding now how heavy that choice can become over time. The case did not accuse. It reflected. It asked without demanding response. Schools incorporated the story into discussions about civic duty and ethics, framing it not as a cautionary tale about crime, but about decision-making. Students who had not been born in 2001 listened with the detachment of distance, absorbing the lesson without the emotional residue that marked older generations. For them, it was history. For others, it was memory. The physical spaces connected to the case continued to exist unremarkably. The service road remained quiet. The burial site returned fully to landscape. The parking lot filled and emptied without ceremony. These places did not announce their past. They required knowledge to be seen as anything more than ordinary, reinforcing the unsettling truth that significance is not inherent in location, but assigned by action. Occasionally, someone would stand in one of those places and feel the weight of what had occurred, a sudden compression of time where decades collapsed into a single moment of awareness. These moments were private, unshared, because articulation felt unnecessary. The understanding was complete without words. In professional circles, the case influenced discussions about anonymous reporting systems, leading to expanded protections and clearer pathways for information to surface without fear of reprisal. The lesson was pragmatic rather than moral. People speak more freely when safety is assured. Silence thrives where consequences feel absolute. The Florida case demonstrated both truths with brutal clarity. As the years advanced, the town's relationship with the story continued to evolve. It was no longer a wound. It was a scar, visible only when attention lingered, otherwise folded into the background of lived experience. Scars do not hurt constantly, but they inform movement, reminding the body where it has been fragile before. Every so often, a new cold case elsewhere would break open through a tip, and comparisons would be drawn. Commentators would mention Florida 2001, invoking it as proof that patience and persistence can be rewarded. Those who had lived through the waiting understood the cost of that patience more intimately. Reward suggests balance. There had been none. There had only been time. The family marked milestones quietly, birthdays acknowledged, anniversaries observed without announcement. They did not seek to keep the case alive. It was alive enough on its own. Their focus turned toward what could still be shaped rather than what had been fixed too late. In that shift lay a form of resilience that did not require explanation. As the story receded further into the past, its presence remained steady, not as spectacle, but as reference. It existed to remind, not to shock. To caution, not to accuse. To illustrate how easily silence can stretch into years, and how decisively it can be broken by a single choice. And in that understanding, the case found its final role, not as a mystery solved, but as a truth integrated, a quiet weight carried forward by a town, a system, and a family that had learned, painfully, that time does not close stories. It only decides when they are finally told. Time continued its work not by erasing the case, but by smoothing its edges, sanding down the sharpest moments until they fit more easily into conversation, into memory, into the long narrative of a place that had learned how to live with what it knew. Florida did what Florida always does. It grew, it rebuilt, it distracted itself with brightness and motion, but beneath that movement, the solved case settled deeper, becoming less a story people told and more a lens through which they quietly judged the world around them. For investigators who had come of age professionally after the arrest, the case existed only as documentation, a series of reports, transcripts, and exhibits bound together with the authority of hindsight. They read it in training rooms, highlighted passages, discussed decision points where different choices might have altered the timeline. To them, the outcome felt inevitable once the anonymous tip entered the record. They did not feel the years of emptiness before it, the slow grind of uncertainty that had shaped every earlier assumption. History is always cleaner than lived experience. Veteran detectives, however, carried a different relationship with the file. They remembered the early days when optimism still lived in unanswered phones and open leads, when each new tip felt like a potential breakthrough rather than another detour. They remembered the slow realization that the case was slipping out of reach, becoming something people spoke about in the past tense while it remained painfully unresolved. For them, the solve was not a surprise, but a reckoning delayed long enough to leave marks. The anonymous caller remained a constant absence within an absence, a presence defined entirely by action rather than identity. Occasionally, speculation resurfaced, triggered by unrelated cases or community gossip, but it never gained traction. The lack of a face made the call more powerful, not less. It allowed the act itself to stand alone, stripped of narrative, stripped of redemption or condemnation. It was simply a moment where silence failed. That failure echoed in subtle ways. Local hotlines reported increased activity, not all of it relevant, not all of it actionable, but indicative of a shift. People who had lived through the case understood now that information did not need to be perfect to be valuable. It only needed to be offered. Law enforcement adapted, refining triage processes, filtering noise from signal without discouraging the instinct to speak. The lesson was delicate: encourage without overwhelming, listen without promising. The town's younger generation absorbed the story differently. For them, the case was not a mystery, but a cautionary example embedded in the background of their upbringing. They heard about it in classrooms, at community events, through parents who framed it as a reminder to pay attention, to trust instincts, to question what feels too easily explained. The fear was not explicit. The awareness was. Physical reminders continued to exist, quietly resisting significance. The service road remained empty most nights, its silence no longer suspicious, just complete. The burial site blended back into landscape, indistinguishable from the land around it, as if the earth itself had reclaimed neutrality. The parking lot, repaved and repainted, reflected sunlight without revealing what it had once held. These places did not demand remembrance. They allowed it. Occasionally, someone would stop there anyway, standing still long enough for memory to surface, for the past to intrude on the present. These moments were rarely shared. They belonged to individuals, not to the collective, because the case had taught everyone that the most significant decisions often happen in isolation, unseen, unrecorded until much later. In legal circles, the case found its way into arguments about delayed justice and evidentiary decay. Scholars debated whether time should soften punishment, whether decades of freedom complicated moral calculus. The courts remained firm. Time did not absolve. It contextualized, but it did not excuse. That stance resonated with those who had lived through the waiting. Delay had already extracted its price. The convicted individual's name surfaced occasionally in appellate. There would be no alternate ending. The family marked this shift quietly, noticing the gradual reduction in letters, calls, and interview requests. Public interest waned, replaced by newer tragedies, fresher mysteries. This fading did not feel like abandonment. It felt appropriate. Their loss had never been meant for consumption. Its transition back into privacy was a relief. In moments of reflection, they acknowledged a difficult truth. Knowing had not brought peace, but it had brought orientation. The world made sense again, not because it was fair, but because it was no longer inexplicable. That distinction mattered. It allowed memory to settle without constantly reopening into speculation. Community leaders referenced the case when discussing trust, transparency, and responsibility, careful not to exploit it, but unwilling to let its lesson dissolve. They spoke about the cost of looking away, about how ordinary environments can host extraordinary harm, about how systems must assume complexity rather than simplicity. These conversations did not dominate civic life. They informed it. As Florida's seasons cycled relentlessly, the case continued its transformation from event to artifact. It existed in archives, in training manuals, in the quiet knowledge shared by those who had been there. It no longer demanded attention. It waited, ready to surface when needed, a reminder embedded in collective memory rather than active fear. When other cold cases cracked open elsewhere, journalists drew lines between them and Florida 2001, framing them as part of a broader narrative about time, guilt, and the inevitability of truth. The comparisons were imperfect, but they carried a shared message: silence is not static. It erodes. It weakens. It eventually gives way. In private moments, people still wondered about the anonymous caller, imagining the night the decision was made, the hesitation before dialing, the relief and dread tangled together once the call ended. That moment, unseen and undocumented, had altered lives more decisively than any public act. It underscored a final, unsettling idea: history often turns not on grand gestures, but on small, quiet interruptions. And so the case remained, no longer an open wound, not yet a closed book, but something bound into the fabric of the town, of the system, of the people who had waited long enough to see silence break. It did not shout. It did not accuse. It simply existed, steady and undeniable, a reminder that time may dull attention, but it never erases truth. Long after the headlines stopped printing the words "cold case" in bold type, the after effects continued to ripple through lives that had never appeared in court transcripts or police reports. The solve did not end the story. It altered its gravity. Conversations changed tone. Assumptions were revisited. People who had once dismissed the case as distant or abstract found themselves re-examining moments from their own pasts, asking quiet questions they had never thought to ask before. Former witnesses carried the heaviest weight. Some had testified. Others had spoken only to detectives behind closed doors. A few had never come forward at all. Now, with the truth exposed, memory became unstable. They replayed fragments of 2001 in their minds, wondering whether something they noticed, something they ignored, might have mattered more than they believed. Regret did not always arrive as guilt. Sometimes it arrived as exhaustion, the fatigue of realizing that certainty had been available, but courage had not. Law enforcement agencies across the state quietly adjusted their internal cultures. Training emphasized persistence without obsession, openness without desperation. Detectives were reminded that a case does not expire simply because attention fades. Evidence storage protocols were revisited. Tip handling procedures refined. None of these changes were announced with ceremony. They happened in policy memos, in late meetings, in subtle shifts of emphasis that acknowledged a shared vulnerability. Time is both enemy and ally. The solved case also reshaped how unsolved ones were viewed. Files that had gathered dust were reopened, not necessarily with new evidence, but with new eyes. Investigators questioned long-held assumptions, revisited early exclusions, reconsidered individuals once deemed irrelevant. The Florida 2001 case had proven that certainty can be false, and that silence can conceal relevance. That realization was uncomfortable, but productive. Families of other missing or murdered individuals watched closely. Some felt renewed hope, others a sharper sense of impatience. The anonymous tip became a symbol, invoked in community meetings and advocacy campaigns as proof that answers can surface even after years of absence. But it also created pressure, an unspoken expectation that every cold case was merely waiting for its moment. For those still waiting, the passage of time felt heavier, not lighter. The media's relationship with the case evolved as well. Early reporting had focused on shock, on revelation, on the dramatic undoing of decades-long mystery. Later coverage grew more restrained, analytical, interested less in spectacle and more in implication. Journalists examined systemic failures, cultural blind spots, the psychology of delayed confession. The story matured, shifting from narrative to case study. True crime audiences dissected the details obsessively. Online forums debated motives, timelines, and the identity of the anonymous caller with relentless energy. The lack of new information only intensified speculation. For some, the mystery had simply migrated from the crime itself to the act that solved it. Why then? Why now? Why anonymously? These questions, unanswered, ensured the case remained alive in a different form. Yet away from screens and comment sections, daily life continued. Children grew up hearing fragments of the story, filtered through adult caution. Businesses opened and closed. Roads expanded. New residents arrived with no memory of the original disappearance, encountering the case only as an anecdote, a local legend stripped of immediacy. To them, it was history. To others, it was unfinished emotional business. The judicial finality did not extend to personal closure. The family experienced waves of emotion triggered by unexpected stimuli, a familiar song, a news alert about an unrelated arrest, the sound of a phone ringing late at night. Closure, they learned, is not a moment. It is a process without a schedule, uneven and deeply personal. Knowing the truth did not simplify grief. It redefined it. They chose, eventually, to reclaim parts of their lives that had been paused for decades. Personal rituals replaced public remembrance. They stopped marking anniversaries publicly, stopped giving interviews, stopped allowing the case to define every introduction. This withdrawal was not forgetfulness. It was survival. The story no longer needed witnesses. It had been recorded. For the broader community, the case lingered as a moral reference point. When conversations turned to responsibility, to vigilance, to the cost of indifference, someone inevitably mentioned Florida 2001. Not dramatically. Casually. As if citing a known principle rather than recounting a tragedy. That normalization was itself a transformation. The case had moved from shock to instruction. Academics studying criminology and sociology incorporated the case into curricula, highlighting its lessons about delayed reporting, cognitive bias, and the fragility of certainty. Students debated ethical questions about anonymity and justice, about whether truth is diminished when its source remains unknown. There were no definitive answers, only frameworks for understanding complexity. The anonymous caller remained an unresolved presence, a silhouette at the edge of every discussion. Their silence after the call was as complete as their silence before it. No reward claimed. No explanation offered. The absence of motive frustrated some and comforted others. It suggested that not all acts of accountability require recognition, that some interventions exist solely to correct imbalance. In quieter moments, detectives who had worked the case revisited their own internal narratives. They asked whether they had missed signs, whether institutional momentum had blinded them to alternatives. These reflections were not public. They did not lead to disciplinary action or scandal. They led to humility. An understanding that investigation is not just about logic, but about listening to uncertainty. As years passed, the case's physical artifacts became more abstract. Evidence boxes remained sealed, unlikely ever to be reopened. Digital files were archived, their formats updated, their contents preserved for reference rather than pursuit. The machinery of justice moved on, carrying the case with it as a completed chapter, no longer active but never erased. The community's relationship with fear subtly shifted. The solved case did not eliminate anxiety, but it altered its focus. The unknown was no longer boundless. It had limits. Truth, even delayed, had demonstrated its capacity to surface. That belief did not guarantee safety. It offered resilience. And still, at unexpected times, the story resurfaced. A late-night documentary rerun. A podcast episode revisiting the tip. A passing comment during a conversation about memory and time. Each resurfacing felt less like reopening a wound and more like touching a scar, a reminder of what had healed imperfectly. The Florida 2001 cold case no longer demanded attention, but it commanded respect. It had outlasted denial, survived neglect, and emerged altered but intact. Its resolution did not answer every question. It reframed them. Silence had been broken, not by force, but by choice, and that choice continued to echo, quietly shaping how truth was understood long after the moment itself had passed. Even as the case settled into the category of solved, it refused to become simple. Resolution did not flatten it. It added depth. What once felt like a straight line from disappearance to discovery now appeared layered, crowded with missed intersections and delayed turns. The truth had arrived, but it arrived carrying the weight of everything that had postponed it. In law enforcement circles, the case became shorthand for a difficult reality. Answers are not always found by searching harder, but by waiting differently. Detectives spoke about it in measured tones, careful not to mythologize the tip or diminish the years that preceded it. They acknowledged that persistence alone had not solved the case. A shift in human behavior had. Someone, somewhere, had crossed an internal line. That crossing fascinated psychologists. They examined patterns of delayed disclosure, studying why people hold on to critical information and what finally compels